Hey everybody, we're looking for some sponsors. If you're a business owner and you want to support the cause, please contact me at reformgangsters@gmail.com. Okay, let me welcome everybody again, and I want to introduce my guest today, who is Rita Gigante, and she's the daughter of Vincent Gigante, who was the boss of the Genovese family for many years, and let's everybody say a warm welcome to Rita.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks so much.
You're
Pasquale, Anthony, they've been very good to me.
It's been a pleasure. You know, today we're going to talk about our childhood,
Yes.
because it was kind of unique. I mean, you know,
Very.
was for you it was one way, for me it was another way. You know, female, male. You know, my father did certain things with me, and I'm sure your father did certain things with you. But there's things that we did the same, like Sunday dinner.
Oh God, yeah.
Right? Like, you know, I know when I was a kid, you know, we had Sunday dinner. How was Sunday dinner for you? And I know for me, my father was a cook. I don't know who cooked your Sunday dinners, but how was your household on Sunday?
So Sunday was always in New York. I grew up half in New York, half in New Jersey. I was only 6 months when I was born in Manhattan in the village on the west side. I was only there for 6 months, and then we got moved to New Jersey. But I was always in the city. So half my life was there, half in New Jersey, but always Sunday dinner was at Graham's.
Yeah.
And she cooked. She cooked. Not that my father ate anything that she cooked, but she cooked. He would only eat anything my mother made, not my grandmother. But if we were there, we had to eat whatever my grandmother made. It was always 2:00 in the afternoon, right? And we always either had football on, or baseball, or a cartoon.
Yes.
If it was up to that. And it was great because there was always, listen, it was gravy, it was pasta, it was meatballs, it was a loaf of Italian bread, it was fresh mozzarella, it was ricotta, whatever it was that day. And, you know, breaking bread with family was what we did. We loved it. But where, in my grandmother's apartment, it was very different from where I lived in New Jersey, because it was almost like, I called it the dungeon, very lovingly. Called it the dungeon because all the shades were drawn. There were bars on the windows. It was like you were in jail, but you weren't. You didn't know if it was daytime or nighttime. And so it was a little depressing, you know, as a kid growing up. It was a little depressing. It was a small apartment. It was, you know, 1.5 bedrooms, because the other bedroom was, you know, we had 2 German Shepherds. There was 5 kids, 2 adults, and we were in a 4-room apartment. And that's why Jersey was like, you know, the next step, because we could never live like that. But we loved Sunday dinner. Yeah. We loved it, you know. Even if it was in New Jersey, it was still Sunday dinner.
Right. It's funny because my experience is the same. So always when my father was the youngest child. My grandmother had 16 babies.
My God.
Yeah. But unfortunately, back then, 8 passed away and 8 lived. And my father was the 16th child she gave birth to. Wow. So he was her baby. And my aunt, Josie, who is my cousin Gary's grandmother, who's in the audience, she was his oldest sister. And she was pregnant at the same time my grandmother, which was her mother, was pregnant for my father. So I had a first cousin that was the same age as my father. So, yeah, right, yeah, go figure, right? So, and every Sunday we ate by my grandmother's house in Brooklyn, and she had a big house with a big yard, and I lived in an apartment in Ozone Park. So it was like, you know, to go out to her house, and we went there every Sunday, and my Aunt Josie lived 2 houses down. So we were in and out of each house, and all my cousins were there. And, you know, my father was there, of course, drinking homemade wine, because he always drank homemade wine on Sunday. He used to get it from these Italian guys in Brooklyn. And he would be drinking. My grandmother would always tell him, stop drinking, you got to drive the kids home, because he used to keep the wine under the table. And she did all the cooking. And on Easter, and it's funny because my older cousins now were all in their 70s. I mean, you know, we're all getting up there in age now. And my older cousins still, matter of fact, the other day, my cousin Pauline says to me, I miss Grandma's raviolis. She used to make raviolis only on Easter. These big raviolis. They were like
lead bomb.
Yeah, but they were delicious. She only made them on Easter Sunday, and that's where my life lessons all started. You know, and I always looked forward to going there on Sunday. After she passed away, things kind of changed.
Sure.
You know, Sunday dinner was more by our house. You know, my mother cooked. My father was a better cook than my mother, and you know, and my father, you know, always sports, like always watching the Yankee games in black and white. And it's crazy because I'm a big Yankee fan, and I used to always watch the games with my father and my Uncle Andy. He was a big Yankee fan, and they would always watch it on Sunday on a black and white TV. And I remember in 1959, my father took me to Yankee Stadium for the first time. And now I always saw it on this little black and white TV. When I walked into Yankee Stadium,
Can't even imagine.
it was like, whoa, you know, and I saw all them colors and the green grass, like it sort of blew me away. And, you know, and then, like I said, then things changed, and then we would started eating on Sunday dinner by my aunt's house. And, you know, that's sort of like, as I got a little old, that's where my first like illegal life lesson started. I was by my Aunt Mary's house having Sunday dinner, and the whole family was there. And I was sitting outside. I was about 8 years old, and a guy pulled out on a scooter, and a roll of money fell out of his pocket. And I ran out and I got it, and I ran back in the house, and everybody back then smoked. There was no such thing as secondary smoke and whatever there is. Everybody smoked, and you walked in and it was just a cloud of smoke, and they were drinking wine and smoking. And I ran up to my father with this roll of money, and I said, Daddy, Aunt Mary's neighbor dropped this out of his pocket. And I gave it to him, and I'll never forget, Rita, he took the rubber band off, and it was $80. Now, this was like 1962. $80 was a lot of money, especially to a kid. Like, so a legitimate guy, a father, like, would have said, okay, you know, let's go return it, you know, take me, you know, or return, give it to my Aunt Mary. He has to give this back to your neighbor or whatever. My father, what he did was he took the money, he rolled it back up, and he gave it back to me. And he goes, here, don't spend it all in the same store, he told me. And I, like, looked at him, and I said, all right. And I took it, and the next day, my father took me to a sporting goods store.
Right.
And I bought a baseball mitt with this guy's money. So you know, this was, you know, so these were my Sunday dinner life lessons, you know. And now I'm 8 years old. Now to me, it's okay to, you know, to do stuff like that, which is really, it's not okay, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, but that was my Sunday dinners, you know, and so they progressed into different scenarios. But I used to love Sundays because I got to see my cousins, and I got to eat kinds of food. My father, and desserts, I don't know how your father, so my father was Napolitan.
Right.
And in my neighborhood, there was two pastry shops. There was Savaroli's, which was run by Sicilians, and there was Ariola's that was run by Napolitans. And the big argument in my house was who made better pastries, the Napolitan place or the Sicilian place, because my mother was Sicilian. So that was the big argument every Sunday over desserts, about whether Sicilian pastry is better than, to me, they both taste the same.
Right.
I don't know how you got
cannoli is a good cannoli.
But you lived on the west side, so there was some good pastry shops on the west side.
Yes, there was some good pastry shop. He was a pastry man. He liked his pastries, but he liked it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I never really saw him eat like that. But he had a very bad heart condition. So at one time, everything changed. And then he just ate what my mother brought him. And he ate very meticulously. So, but yeah, it was enjoyable to a degree. And then they were really, you know, for me and him, because I was the youngest, and growing up in my house or with him there, it was scary because he was an enigma of his own. You know, I would watch him probably I would say probably about 8 years old. I'd be sitting on the couch. Now the couch and the dining room are like 3 feet from each other. And like there's a crowd of men sitting around him, right? And you can tell he was very important. And, you know, they would go over to him, they'd whisper in his ear, and he'd whisper back. And then if they looked at him too long, he'd go, "What are you waiting for? Go," like that. And by the time everybody got finished passing notes and this and that, then all of a sudden, the pieces of paper got ripped up, they got flushed down the toilet, or they burned them, whatever it was, you know. And I'm looking at this. In one ear, I'm listening to the cartoons, and the next year, I'm watching this, and I'm going, "What the hell is happening here?" So I didn't really understand, but you know how you know, but you don't know. Right? And you know how you want to ask, but you know you can't ask. right? I mean, that's really what it was. And so for me, because I was a very sensitive, what they call an empath, a sensitive energy, I was picking up everybody's stuff, everybody's anxiety, everybody's, even his, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so, you know, and people often ask me, what was it like growing up? Like, for you, what was a typical night in Ozone Park?
Typical though was in the street in front of my house, playing stickball,
Right.
playing, you know, playing Ringalivio. Everybody knew. First of all, when I was a kid, everybody knew each other. We knew nobody's mother worked.
Right.
Not like today. Unfortunately, everybody's mother has to go to work. And not to be political or anything, I think that's the problem today, that nobody's mother's home anymore. That's why all these kids are bringing guns to school. But that's
Right.
a story for another day. But everybody's mother was home. No, only one of my friends' mother worked because her husband, Mike, passed away young, and she had 4 little kids. And how did she work? She worked up the block and she walked up her corner to this dress factory, and she was a seamstress. That was her job.
My grandmother
She was
too.
3 houses from her door. But so nobody worked. Everybody knew each other. And in the summer, I loved the summer because everybody sat outside. Everybody knew each other. We were in and out of each other's houses. You know, my mother would yell out the window for me to come in the house. You know, I was out all day. You know, and I got one pair of sneakers. School ended, and the next day my mother took me to John's bargain store. She bought me a pair of Converses, and I wore them all summer.
Right,
Them
that was it.
Converse. They cost $4.50. I'll never forget. And I wore the Converses, and me and my kid brother, and I was out all day, and I loved it. Now, 4th of July, my father would get a lot of fireworks. He had a barbecue in the yard. He loved to barbecue. But it's like you just said, like I experienced the same thing you did. There was always men in my house. My father was never as powerful as your father. He never got to that level as a boss, but you know, your father had a lot of, you know, your father was the pinnacle of that lifestyle. He got to the pinnacle of it, you know. But there was always men in my house, and I always was like you. I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what, and I knew he wasn't who he used to tell me he was. Like he used to tell me he worked in the dry cleaners, and I knew that wasn't true, but I didn't know what was true. And I would tell my teacher,
That's
when
great.
she would ask me what your father did for a living, I would say he works in the dry cleaners, but I knew that wasn't true. But I'd say it anyway because I didn't, like you, I didn't know what was true. But Ozone Park was a great neighborhood. I moved to Ozone Park in like 1958, 59 from East New York, Brooklyn. I lived on Belmont Avenue, and then I moved to. Everybody just moved from East New York, which was my father's neighborhood where he was born and raised. And John Gotti comes from that neighborhood, and all of them. And I moved across Conduit Boulevard into Ozone Park.
Okay.
And it was just a beautiful neighborhood. And like I said, everybody knew each other. And as I got older, when I used to get in trouble, the old ladies used to hide us in their house when the cops were chasing us, looking through the old lady, come in my house. And I would run in the house, and they would tell the cops, leave them alone. They're good kids. Stop bothering them.
I got a great story about hiding in houses.
Yeah.
My dad had a dog. His name was Bullets. And it's
Bullets,
true.
that's a good name, Bullets.
Bullets was
He
his
gave
name.
him the right name.
German Shepherd. Love my father, my God. And Bullets, you know, he was particular with who he liked and who he didn't like. And so my grandmother was, she was getting robbed on the street. You know, some man took her pocketbook, and he ran, and bullets from the corner of his eye saw him where my father's place was, 208 Sullivan. And he charged the guy, right? Charged the guy, followed him right into, at that time there was a hotel on Bleecker Street. See if I can remember the name, but hotel. He ran into the hotel. The guy standing at the door who would open the door for people saw my father. He goes, he's in here.
Yeah.
Went in with the dog, got the guy down on the floor, the dog, right? With his mouth open, ready for the command to just rip his throat out, right? So my father says, all right, Bullets, let him go. Who knows what happened to that guy anyway.
Yeah. Well, knowing your father, we have a pretty good idea what happened to him.
5 minutes later, he goes, go, like this to the dog. The dog runs up, down the street, down Sullivan Street, up 4 flights to this woman's apartment, and is at the window waiting for my father to give him the command to come back, because they knew they were going to come looking for the dog, like the police came or whatever. The dog knew how to go on the lamb.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Knew how to go on the lamb. He went, stood there, my father whistled, came right back down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not not that long ago after that, he was poisoned, the dog.
The dog got poisoned.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
Bullets, but it was.
Did they ever find out who poisoned them?
Well, I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
I'm sure they did. I'm
Yeah.
sure that guy, we don't know what happened to him either.
Yeah.
But those typical nights,
Yeah.
I mean, we used to run around.
Everything.
We were out until 6 o'clock. Then they
Yeah.
called you to come in for dinner.
Yeah, yeah.
And you went back out again today. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is. The
I
kids,
know.
they don't ever want to go out
No.
and do anything.
No. And my father too. In the summer, you know, a typical he came to every little league game.
Mm-hmm.
Every little league game he came to. Even if it was on a Saturday morning, I remember he would be out all night.
Right.
He would go out Friday night because he went out every Friday night, and he would go out. He would always wear a suit and tie. He'd go out on Friday night, and he'd be out the next all night. And then in the morning, we would go to the little. If we had a 9 o'clock in the morning game or 8:30 in the morning game, we would go to the little league game, and all of a sudden a car would pull up or two cars would pull up, and here comes all these guys with suits on, and all their ties were open, crisscrossed, and their hair was messed, and they would come and they would all sit in the grandstand and drunk or with a tie and then watch the Little League game. He never missed the Little League game.
Oh.
And it's funny because years later, talking about stories like who your father is, years later, my brother, I found out what my father was in the mob before my brother. So my father had gotten arrested and it was on the front page of the Daily News. And my brother read it. So my brother read it. And so I go downstairs and he has the paper and he tells me, is this true? About Daddy? And I said, yeah. And he was like a little upset, my brother. So I went back upstairs and it was a hot summer day. And I went back upstairs and my father is upstairs and he tells me, did Albert read the newspaper? Does Albert know? And I said, yeah, he knows. I was about 14. My brother was like 12, 11 or 12. I said, yeah, you know, and he had a Little League game that night. And he says, yeah, he knows. He goes, okay. I said, he says, all right, let me go downstairs. We go downstairs, my father and I, right? We go downstairs and my father says, you read the newspaper? And he goes, yeah, I read it. And my father looked at him. My father said to him, you still want me to come to the game? You know, and my brother says, yeah, of course I want you to come to the game. Because my father was worried that he wouldn't, you know, and this is like a gangster now. He's, you know, he's all humble and, you know, you still want me to come to the game. You know, that's because, you know, he's still human, you know, she's still a parent.
Sure.
So we go to the game. And so now it's funny. So none of the other fathers ever knew who my father was. They just thought he was a father of, you know, came to watch his kids in a Little League game. Nobody knew nothing about him. So it's so comical because now we get to the game and like all the fathers are there and we get out of the car and then they see my father. Oh my God, Aunt, we didn't know. Oh, and now they roll up his ass, patting him on the back. Oh my God. To make a long story short, not only do they all, now they're all like, all excited because, oh, he's in the mob. Oh, they start asking him for favors. Whose son get him in the Carpenters Union? Whose son this? And they start asking, and he did, you know, he got one kid in the Construction Union, and as time went on, they started asking him for favors.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't know if you ever
great.
experienced anything like that.
Not
Yeah.
in front of me because
Yeah.
things weren't,
Yeah,
and with the women in the family, things weren't in front of you.
yeah,
You know, things were very, very, you know, you would, in my house, you would get married, you would have kids, you would take care of your mother, and maybe you can have a life after that. Maybe when you're about 80.
yeah,
You might be able to have a life after that.
yeah,
And it's nice that you had conversation with your dad.
Yeah.
With me, it was all of 10 words, you know. You feel all right? Yeah. How's school? Good. Taking care of your mother? Yeah. All right, good. Love you. Love you too. That was it until he passed.
yeah.
And now, because I do what I do for a living, he comes to me every day and he
Yeah.
wants to have a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, so it's amazing.
Yeah.
But what I loved before he passed was I saw sides of him that made him human. You know, that I saw the softer side of him. I understood why people really connected to him. He was very charismatic. He would help anybody that needed help. There was no one in his neighborhood, especially the elderly, that went hungry, that if they couldn't pay their rent, he paid it. You know, so there were attributes to him that were phenomenal. And so I had to see that in him in order to learn to forgive certain things.
Right.
You know, that he did. And I know he got caught up. He did. He got caught up. It was easy.
Yeah.
especially after getting taken under the wing of Vito Genovese.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely loved
yeah.
him.
Loved him to death.
You know, so it was like his son.
Yeah.
You know, and my father had a father, but he was a jeweler, and he wasn't in that life. And then my dad started to take care of his family because they didn't have any money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one thing leads to another after that.
And that's it. And then you become the chin.
And then you become the chin.
Yeah.
And it's funny, everybody thinks they know where that name came from, and it came from my grandmother. It did not come from the street. His name is Vincenzo, and she would call him Chinzy as a baby, and then it got shortened to Chin.
Chin, yeah, makes sense.
And
Yeah, I never knew that. I like that. That's some mob trivia. We gotta go with that. Yeah,
we need a game.
That's good. We need
a game
yeah.
out there.
That's good.
So it really was my grandmother that started all of that,
Yeah.
not knowing what she was getting herself into by starting it. But and it's funny because my grandmother loathed that lifestyle. I mean, it was her son. She protected him to the death. But she was a very educated woman. She came from an educated family. In Italy, they were well off. They had servants. She was going to be a pharmacist. You know, they were all geared towards that.
Yeah.
You know, so it was different life there than it was here.
Right.
And then she came here and shared a bathroom with 5 other people, and she was losing her mind a little bit.
Of course.
You know.
Yeah.
But my grandfather, all his family was here, so that's why he wanted
That's why
to
it
come.
came. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a bonding experience with your father at the end. You bonded at some point. Yeah.
I did. And little pieces throughout, like he had 2 left feet. He couldn't dance for shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he loved Elvis. So if I put Elvis
I
music
love
on,
Elvis too. Yeah.
if I put Elvis music on, I'd be able to get him up.
Yeah.
And like just even if he moved his hips or whatever, be able to get him up. And that's when he came out of character, and he became a father.
Right.
You know, and even if it was for 10 seconds, I soaked it up.
Yeah.
Because I knew he was a human being, not just who everybody said he was.
Right, and
I didn't know until I was 16.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I bonded with my father at different stages of my life. I guess different kinds of bond. Like when I was a kid, we bonded over sports. My father loved sports.
Did he?
He loved sports. He loved the fights. He took me to Shea Stadium when I was a kid to see Nino Benvenuti fight Emil Griffith for the middleweight title.
Right.
I was a kid. He took me to see Muhammad Ali fight. I mean, he took me to see everybody fight. He loved boxing. He loved the Yankees. And it's funny because we bonded. He grew up in Brooklyn, and back then, everybody were Brooklyn Dodger fans.
Yeah.
But he said the reason why I hit hard and have a great left hook is because I used to knock out all the Brooklyn Dodger fans. He said it because I was a Yankee. He loved Joe. If you ever said anything bad about Joe DiMaggio or Rocky Marciano, you had a problem.
Yeah.
And so we bonded over sports, baseball, music. He loved music. Every Sunday, the record player was going. Mario Lanza, loved Mario Lanza. Loved Mario Lanza to where one night we were with Frank Sinatra in Gillies. We were sitting with Frank Sinatra, and Sinatra asked my father, "So Andy, who's your favorite singer?" Thinking my father would say, "You, Frank, of course you." He says, "Mario Lanza." Who had a better voice than Mario Lanza? And Frank Sinatra says, "Mario Lanza, he's better than me." My father goes, "Yeah, he's better than you." We said, "Yeah." And Frank Sinatra, of course, he laughed. What was he going to say? But so and then as I got older, then we bonded over the street. Then when he started mentoring me with the mob stuff, and then I got caught up in all that with him, and I sort of, through bonding with him, I lost my identity, because, I wanted to be him. Right. I wanted to be him. I always wanted to be a wise guy, and I loved the power he had, and I loved that people feared him and the respect he got, and I wanted that. That's what I wanted, and I went for that, and I paid the price for that.
It's easy to get caught up. The ego takes over, and they feel. And for my father, it was all about power.
Yeah.
It was never about the money. Talk about, sports.
Yeah.
He had no favorite sports team. It was who was going to win that week.
Yeah. What bookmakers were going to bring the money. Yeah.
And he had no fear of doing it. It was like, we laying out $100,000.
Yeah.
Even if we lost that, next day he'd make back 200,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So he used to laugh at me because I used to watch, and I'd say, I want the Yankees to win, or I want this one to win. And he'd say, no, we got to go. You root for this team, he'd tell me. You root for this team. This is who has to win. Never knew why they had to win, but all right, I rooted for them nonetheless.
Yeah, it's crazy. Does anything stand out most for you with your father in the stay?
In a good way or a bad way?
Both ways.
In a good way, he was very compassionate when it came to my anxieties, because I did grow up with a lot of anxiety, panic attacks, OCD, because of what was going on around me, and because I was so sensitive. So he was very, very, never yelled at me, never I'm sure my brothers and sisters got beatings. Me, no, because he wouldn't, he wouldn't dare. But he used to rub my back if I was having anxiety or if I wasn't feeling well. He had the best hands, even though he was a boxer. He had hands like a surgeon, very soft. He would rub my back and my hair, and I would fall asleep. So those are I remember those moments where, again, he became a dad, There were moments, though, like when he would check himself into St. Vincent's Hospital.
Yeah, when he was making out he was had mental illness.
Mental illness, and, we were on the 3rd floor with the paranoid schizophrenics and the, bipolar people that were really seriously ill, that I think that was the hardest for me to get past, because I felt like, he was making a mockery of people who were really ill, and I would have to go up to that place. Now, as sensitive as I am, I would barely make it through the hall to get to where he was. Sit on the bed, I was like asleep in 10 minutes, And I would remember the nurse coming in and, giving him his meds. Now, what meds? Like, they gave him the meds. He knew how to hide them in his mouth.
Sure he did.
So, and I stayed up long enough to watch this. And so when she left, and he had to open up his mouth to show her he swallowed. She left, spit him out, put him in a napkin, gave him to my mother, take him home, flush him down the toilet. So he never took the meds. But that, he checked himself in sometimes for 3 weeks at a time. This was not easy to go and watch. I don't know how he did it.
Especially, you knew that it wasn't real. You had to know that he was faking it.
At that time, of course.
Yeah, when you were, how old were you when that started?
I just remember being my first time there. I don't know if he'd gone before, but I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
I was probably about 19.
Yeah. So you knew the deal. You knew what was going on. But just to look at it from his point, how did he imagine? How here's a guy that's not insane, going through that, putting himself through that. He really didn't want to go to jail.
No. He started as a kid.
And the sad thing is that eventually he did go to jail.
Yeah.
And he died in jail.
He swore he would never go back after the first time with Costello.
Yeah.
He swore he would never go back.
Yeah, yeah.
And he hadn't talked on the phone in 40 years.
I know.
Never.
Never.
Until he got to jail and 9/11 happened. And he got scared because he didn't know if any of us were in New York City.
Right. Yeah.
Picked up the phone, was very lucid, spoke to my mother and whoever else, and that was it.
That was it. They knew.
That was it.
Yeah. Well, Rita, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. I love talking to you, and I'm sure this is going to be the first of many conversations, because we just scratched the surface.
Just the surface, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.